We, of course, have been concerned all morning about the McCarthyism that is creeping across Cape Cod, from Sandwich to Provincetown. And, of course, John Podhoretz is with us, who is known, of course, as the Prince of Martha's Vineyard. Have you been excluded from clam bakes of late,
sorry.
John Podhoretz?
I have never been to Martha's Vineyard, and I'm 57 years old. So yes, I've been excluded my entire life, Joe.
Yeah. You should write about
so
that.
I'm really and I keep kosher, so I couldn't even eat the clams at the clam
that's
bake.
horrible. No wonder they don't
It's
invite
horrible.
you
It's
to
McCarthyism. It's McCarthyism to serve clams.
Yes. Yeah.
On Martha's Vineyard. That's what I say. That's McCarthyism. Can I just say, I think Dershowitz phrased this badly, and the McCarthyism thing is a ludicrous thing to say.
Yeah.
But I find it totally plausible that in this unbelievably politicized partisan atmosphere, that his friendships are being tested and his social relationships are being impacted by his let's say, favorable treatment of Trump and how that he shouldn't be impeached. This is very much of a piece with the social experiences of a lot of people who take views that contrast with, the orthodoxy in the communities that they live in, and he's now experiencing it, and he hasn't experienced it before, but a lot of us have in the course of our lives.
Well, I was just going to.
And a lot of people are now.
I was just going to say, there's a reason why people like you and I haven't been invited to Martha's Vineyard parties while the Clintons and the Obamas ruled the roost there. Why should Alan Dershowitz be so shocked that it's finally happening to him? I mean, I wonder how many conservatives have been sitting around the table of those parties over the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, did they have Steve Scalise there when Barack Obama was holding court on Martha's Vineyard? Did they have, did they have Tom DeLay there when Bill Clinton ruled? I mean, come on. I mean, he's just. These things happen. And by the way, it's not just that he's against the impeaching of Donald Trump. The guy is running resistance for Paul Manafort every bit as much as he did for O.J. Simpson.
Right. Well, fair enough. And, some of us would think that some of that appellate work on behalf of O.J. and others, also could be the sort of thing that would lead someone to be shunned in certain sectors of polite society. But right. If Dershowitz is having this experience, it is a little representative. Like it's very easy to make fun of it because it's like, I'm not having fun on Martha's Vineyard anymore. But I mean, it is suggestive of how impossible it is now in this atmosphere to have to hold opinions that run counter to the orthodoxy of the world that you live in.
But again, but again, though, and I want to open this up to everybody else, but I'm speaking to you as a conservative because you and I would understand this pretty well as being outspoken conservatives. Again, it may be a little more intense, but my God, if I tried to walk on Martha's Vineyard in 1998 or 1999 during impeachment or 2000 during the recount, nobody would say, hey, there's Joe Scarborough, right-wing congressman. Let's invite him, to our clam bake.
Right. And by the way, the other thing is it's not necessarily so pleasant to be in the company of people who disagree with you so powerfully that it's hard to have civil concourse. That's something that happened, for example, to my parents in the late 60s, early 70s, when they moved from the left to the right, and their friendships were deeply compromised because they had two choices, one of which was to kind of stay silent and smile and not sort of involve themselves in the most controversial conversations, or to fight back. Either way, that's not a pleasant position to be in, either to swallow your words or to end up being, having combat with people that you're just trying to have a nice dinner with.
Right.
And so
No. I totally agree with you. And by the way, as you see, we have John Podhoretz with us. He's the editor of Commentary Magazine, also columnist at the New York Post. Also joining us, national correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC, Steve Kornacki. Fortune Magazine senior editor-at-large Lee Gallagher, and columnist and deputy editorial page editor with the Washington Post, Ruth Marcus. And, Ruth, it's not, I will say, it's a bit more intense than it was, let's say, even during the Clinton administration, because there you knew who, you knew the sides. Now, I can tell you, and I'm not alone here, but when I get together with family members, we have learned you do not talk politics.
To avoid.
For the first time in our lives, we understand that if we are going to be a happy, functioning family unit, we don't talk about Donald Trump.
It can't be done.
And people don't defend Paul Manafort at my dinner table. And I don't attack Paul Manafort at my dinner table. We talk about kids and grandkids, and that's it.
I think that the intensity today is so much more than the intensity of 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We had intense fights then we had enormous family disruption over at our family dinner table, large extended family dinner table, over things like during the Bush administration, the war in Iraq. I was a member of the Washington Post editorial board, which was supportive of the war, and I got a lot of incoming from family members. But this is different. This is an intensity level that really, John talked about his parents in the 60s and 70s. This really has fractured a lot of friendships that survived some of those earlier moments.
No, I will say one of Mika's family's Thanksgiving dinners ended up on the front lawn during the Iraq War. I think we've seen really intense times like this. I think you can go back to Vietnam, and sure, there was squabbling, but that was more of a generation.
My brother was working in the Bush administration.
Than anything else. Yeah, one of her brothers was working in the...
Well, my father was writing op-eds critical. So that's that's intense. I don't think...
Yeah.
I hope
that sounds like it. Yes, that sounds like a volatile.
That was a
right there,
and it was Dr. Brzezinski after all.
Wow.
You're not one to sort of bite his tongue.
It feels. I think to the extent it feels different now, and it feels more intense, and it feels like this sort of thing is happening more. I think one of the reasons is all of the political discussion, all of the polarization right now. It's in everybody's face 24/7. You look at your phone.
What Donald Trump wants it to be.
Right, and it's his style. This is the Twitter president. And so you check your phone when you get out of your car, get off the subway, whatever it is, and you are confronted with 5 emotionally pleasing tweets or Facebook posts from people you agree with that put the world in starkly moral terms that make you go, yes, this is the side I'm on, and you're confronted with 5 that make you say, no, these are the people I'm fighting against. And you get that 24/7 throughout the day, whereas it used to be what? The nightly news, the morning newspaper, and then you would just talk to your coworkers during the day, and then maybe it'd be other stuff you'd talk about.
Yeah, I mean, and Lee, though, I do wonder, and maybe this is just me, but Trump tweets now, I don't even read the tweets. I wait for the reaction to the tweets, and it's the same old crowd. And so I remember something was tweeted a couple weeks, or last week, it seems like 5 years ago, where Donald Trump just completely contradicted himself into, pass Goodlatte too.
Right.
And then the next, then he's like, I never said pass Goodlatte too. Instead of ripping ashcloth and the whole ashcloth, sackcloth and ashes, I just laughed.
Yeah,
I just laughed, and I turned off my phone.
It's we've moved. I mean, we're really living in a post-fact world, as we've all commented a lot. Maybe towards a never-fact world. I mean, that things are just false,
That's
and I think that
dangerous.
it's dangerous. And I also think it's a strategy playing in with the debasement of the media, because it's all of a piece, right? I mean, many reporters feel like people are not even believing that they are actually reporting, and so that has a real impact. But these, I mean, the thing about Harley last week, Harley sales are down. Harley Davidson 7% because of their move. Well, the move was just announced last month. He was talking about sales in 2017. It just, there's no way. And it's laughable.
It literally
and then he corrected himself with one typo over people pour over my tweets. He said, oh, you know, I've written many best-selling books. I pride myself on my writing. It was P-O-R-E, not P-O-U-R, you know. That's the thing that gets corrected. But anyway, I think it's all part of the same piece that we're living in. And of the Martha's Vineyard thing, by the way, I will say, it's front page news that you know, Dershowitz feels excluded there, because we're still, even though these filter bubbles are what led to the election, arguably, we're still in our bubbles. We are still not colliding and crossing boundaries and talking with each other. We are still living in our isolated worlds, I think, to a large degree.
Ruth, you have a new column this morning on who you say would be the Trump Supreme Court pick who would pose the biggest danger to abortion rights. Who is that?
That is Amy Coney Barrett. She's been a judge on the Federal Appeals Court based in Chicago for 8 months. So she has the shortest judicial track record and paper trail of any of the potential nominees. But she has a lot of, I had a great time over the 4th of July reading law review articles, a little pathetic, that she wrote. And here's what emerges from her law review articles. She is extremely personally opposed to abortion. It comes through in law review articles that she wrote about the duty of a Catholic judge hearing death penalty cases. And she has, and this is very relevant to Senator Collins and the others, a very not unusual, but very well-developed view about how much respect a justice who she says believes that a precedent that is wrongly decided, she says that justice's responsibility is to the Constitution and not to uphold the precedent. So I think you put those two together and it's a flashing neon sign, let me at it, all over Rule Row.
So I'm wondering, John Podhoretz, do you agree with Walter Isaacson earlier said this may move John Roberts not to be a liberal, but more of an institutionalist if the court tries to lurch too quickly? He's more of a step-by-step incrementalist, as we saw in the Affordable Care Act.
Well, if Trump's next pick is a hardline conservative, there is this space in the court for someone to be the sort of leftward edge of the right, and it seems over time that those spaces do get filled by justices almost by osmosis or simply by the process of how these things work, and Roberts is the obvious person to be that person. I think in the Barrett case, you have an interesting dynamic for Trump. Barrett is clearly going to be would be the most controversial of the nominees, and he might like it because that would stimulate the right, get people out to vote if she comes under really grievous attack in the fall.
All right, Ruth Marcus and John Podhoretz, Steve Kornacki, and Lee Gallagher, thank you guys so much.
Guys.
It's such a great panel. We have to have you on tomorrow, which means I'm going to ask you to stay so we can post tape. And that does it for us this morning. Chris Jensen picks up the coverage right now. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.